the next 20 minutes, everything you know about digital security is going to be dismantled. Imagine a world where the police have the keys to every house, but the locks were changed months ago by someone they didn't even know was in the building. For years, Interpol, the world's most powerful police organization, operated under a comfortable illusion. They believed that by tracking IPs and following the money, they could contain the digital underworld. But while Western agencies were playing checkers, a new breed of security architecture was being forged in the neon-lit shadows of Moscow and St. Petersburg. These weren't just hackers. They were architects of a digital iron curtain, so sophisticated it didn't just hide crime, it made the very concept of an investigation obsolete. Tonight, we go deep into the urban labyrinths where the code is written, and the agents are always one step behind. Before we reveal how a single overlooked Russian protocol brought the world's largest crime syndicates to their knees, and why Interpol was the last to know, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments right now. Are you in a glass-towered metropolis or a quiet tech hub? The story we're about to tell started in a city just like yours, but it ended in a way that changed the internet forever. Stick around because by the end of this video, you'll never look at your secure connection the same way again. The story begins in the heart of London's financial district, where the glass monoliths of global banking reach toward a gray sky. In the summer of 2024, a silent epidemic began to sweep through the high-frequency trading floors. It wasn't a virus that crashed systems, but something far more insidious. A perfectly mirrored data leak that left no digital footprint. Interpol's cybercrime directorate in Lyon was flooded with red notices, yet every lead hit a concrete wall. The investigators were used to the usual suspects: untraceable VPNs, onion routers, and encrypted shards. But this was different. The data wasn't being stolen, it was being rearranged. The trail didn't lead to a dark web basement, but to a series of pristine high-end server farms in the Federation, operating under a protocol the West had dismissed as obsolete legacy code. The agents in Lyon viewed Russian cybersecurity as a clunky defensive relic of the Cold War, failing to realize it had evolved into a predatory weapon of absolute invisibility. Within the corridors of Interpol, the mood was one of frustrated arrogance. Senior agents, veterans of the takedowns of Silk Road and Alphabi, believed they had the definitive map of the digital underworld. They focused on the visible hubs, the skyscrapers of Dubai and the tech parks of Singapore. Russia was viewed as a chaotic Wild West where hackers ran free, but their security methods were considered primitive, largely because they didn't follow the standardized zero-trust models being pushed by Silicon Valley. What they overlooked was the SORM legacy, a deeply integrated surveillance and security architecture that functioned less like a firewall and more like a sentient nervous system. While Interpol waited for the Russian authorities to provide logs, the Russians were busy perfecting a system that ensured logs never existed in a format the West could interpret. This oversight wasn't just a technical gap, it was a fundamental misunderstanding of how power is projected in the 21st century. As the London breach expanded to Tokyo and Frankfurt, the sheer scale of the disruption became impossible to ignore. Global drug cartels, who had traditionally used encrypted phones like EncroChat, were suddenly switching to a new, mysterious, gray line communication system. Interpol noticed a massive drop in actionable intelligence. It was as if the world's most dangerous men had simply vanished into air, despite being more active than ever. The agents assumed it was just a new layer of encryption, but the reality was far more terrifying. The cartels were utilizing a static ghost protocol developed by a rogue collective of former Russian state security specialists. This protocol didn't hide the message. It hid the entire existence of the network by piggybacking on the urban noise of smart city infrastructure. Every traffic light in New York and every automated transit gate in Paris was unwittingly hosting fragments of a criminal empire's command and control. The turning point came when a young analyst named Marcus, stationed in a cramped, humid office in Singapore, noticed a pattern in the chaos. He realized that the glitches reported in city grids across the globe weren't accidents. They were heartbeats. He started mapping these anomalies against the movements of high-level Russian cyber defense contractors. What he found was a startling correlation. Wherever these specialists were hired to audit a city's security, criminal activity within that city's digital borders became invisible to Interpol. The Russian security methods weren't protecting the data. They were creating a vacuum where only those with the specific Russian-made decryption keys could see anything at all. Interpol agents had overlooked these methods because they appeared to be legitimate cybersecurity upgrades. It was the ultimate Trojan horse, installed with a handshake and a multi-million-dollar contract in the world's most modern cities. Marcus's findings were initially met with skepticism at the Lion headquarters. The old guard couldn't believe that primitive Russian techniques could outmaneuver the multi-billion-dollar AI-driven tools of the West. But as Marcus pushed further, he uncovered the Krasny Gate, Red Gate, incident. A major international shipping firm had its entire logistics chain hijacked by a syndicate operating out of an urban center in the Urals. When Interpol tried to intervene, they found that the Russian servers weren't just blocking them. They were spoofing the agents' own credentials back at them. The Russian security layers were so deep that they could intercept Interpol's requests, rewrite them in real time, and send back validated data that showed no crime was occurring. The agents were essentially staring at a high-definition video of a safe while the thieves were emptying it right in front of them, using the very security protocols Interpol had ignored as non-standard. This realization sent shockwaves through the global intelligence community. The Iron Curtain hadn't been torn down, it had been digitized and exported. Urban centers that prided themselves on being smart cities were actually becoming the most vulnerable, as their interconnectedness provided the perfect camouflage for this new Russian methodology. In Moscow, the architects of this system, men who moved in the shadows of the Kremlin but operated with the flair of Silicon Valley CEOs, watched as the West scrambled. They knew that Interpol's reliance on standardized, transparent protocols was their greatest weakness. By creating a proprietary, nonlinear security logic, the Russians had ensured that even if Interpol hacked the system, they wouldn't know what they were looking at. It was like trying to read a book where the letters changed every time you blinked. By late 2025, the situation reached a boiling point. A coordinated cyber-physical attack on the power grids of 3 major European capitals was traced back to a security audit performed by a Russian-linked firm. The attack didn't just turn off the lights. It locked the engineers out of their own systems using a recursive lock technique that Interpol had seen in small-scale Russian forums years prior but never bothered to study. The method used the city's own high-speed fiber optics to create a feedback loop that fried the hardware of any unauthorized device trying to connect. Interpol agents realized that their advanced forensic tools were being literally melted by obsolete Russian defensive code. The disruption to global crime was merely a side effect. The true goal was the total dominance of the urban digital environment. The agents were forced to confront a bitter truth. Their oversight had allowed a parallel internet to form. This wasn't the dark web, which is messy and detectable, but a gray web that lived on top of the legitimate internet. It was polished, fast, and entirely controlled by the very methods they had dismissed. Interpol's directorate held an emergency summit in Geneva, but the mood was bleak. The Russian representatives at the summit sat in silence, occasionally offering technical assistance that everyone knew was a veiled threat. The message was clear. If you want to police the modern city, you have to play by our rules, or you won't be able to see the crime at all. The very methods that were supposedly built to secure the world were now the greatest tools for its subversion. In the streets of London, New York, and Hong Kong, life appeared normal, but underneath the surface, a war was being lost. The gray line communications were now the standard for every major syndicate, from human traffickers to billion-dollar money launderers. They paid taxes to the Russian architects for protection, ensuring that their traffic remained invisible to the Western eye. Interpol agents, once the hunters, were now relegated to being observers of a play they couldn't understand. They watched the data flow, saw the spikes in activity, but couldn't peel back the layers of the Russian Matryoshka encryption. Every layer they removed only revealed another, more complex layer underneath, often with a logic bomb designed to erase the evidence the moment it was touched. The Swiss Alpine project, codenamed Operation Mirror Image, was Interpol's last stand. The defector, a man known only as Volkov, explained that the Russian methods weren't based on complex mathematics alone, but on temporal hiding. They were using the microscopic delays in global internet traffic, the milliseconds it takes for a signal to travel from London to Moscow, to hide data packets. Interpol agents had been looking for hidden files, but the data was actually hidden in the silence between the noise. To catch a criminal, Interpol would have to slow down the entire internet, an impossible task that would bankrupt the global economy in hours. This was the genius of the Russian oversight. They had built a security system that used the speed of light as its primary encryption layer. As Volkov began to deconstruct the Gray Line protocol, he revealed the existence of the Urban Oracle. This was a central AI, housed in a data center deep beneath a Moscow shopping mall, that monitored every smart city in the West. Every time an Interpol agent in Chicago or Sydney queried a database, the Oracle saw it first. It would then reroute the reality of that city's data to ensure the agents saw exactly what the Oracle wanted them to see. The disruption of global crime was a secondary objective. The Oracle was actually a tool for total information control. Interpol had been overlooking these methods because they were designed to be indistinguishable from the background radiation of the modern web. The agents weren't just failing to see the crime. They were living in a simulated version of the internet where crime didn't exist unless the Oracle allowed it. The tension in the Swiss bunker was palpable. If the Oracle was as powerful as Volkov claimed, then Interpol's own communication was compromised. The lead agent, a veteran named Sarah, realized that their secure location was likely already flagged. Just as this thought crossed her mind, the lights in the bunker flickered. Not a power cut, but a rhythmic pulse. The same pulse Marcus had seen in the Singapore glitches. The Oracle was knocking. The Russian security methods they had ignored for years were now literally knocking on the door of their last secret facility. Sarah ordered an immediate analog shift. They would go back to paper, pen, and offline systems. It was the only way to escape the gaze of the digital god they had let the Russians build. While Interpol went dark, the world outside was descending into a new kind of chaos. The invisible crime syndicates, feeling the heat of the Oracle's tighter control, began to fight back. They realized they were no longer partners with the Russian architects, but subjects. Street wars broke out in the digital districts of Neo-Tokyo and the tech corridors of San Francisco. Not with guns, but with DDoS bombs that targeted the very security protocols the Russians had installed. The disruption was global. Hospitals in Germany lost access to patient records. The NYSE saw phantom trades that didn't exist on any ledger. The Russian methods had succeeded in blinding Interpol, but they had also created a monster that even Moscow couldn't control. The digital Iron Curtain was beginning to rust from the inside out. Interpol, now working from a fleet of mobile offline command centers hidden in the urban sprawl of Zurich, began to piece together a counterattack. They couldn't outcode the Oracle, but they could overload it. Sarah's team realized that the Oracle's strength, its ability to monitor every smart device, was also its weakness. If they could trigger a simultaneous data vomit from every IoT device in a single city, they could create a blind spot in the Oracle's vision for just a few seconds. They chose London as the target. The plan was to use a forgotten legacy radio frequency to trigger every smart meter, every connected fridge, and every automated bus in the city to send a massive burst of junk data to the Russian servers. It was a gamble that could burn out the city's grid, but Interpol had no other choice. The night of the Great Static in London was unlike anything the city had ever seen. At precisely 3 a.m., the city's digital pulse flatlined, then exploded. For 6 seconds, the Oracle was blinded. In those 6 seconds, Interpol agents, operating with handheld localized scanners, captured the true ledger of the Grey Line. They didn't get names, but they got digital fingerprints. They saw the flow of money, the location of the ghost servers, and the identities of the high-level Russian security auditors who were pulling the strings. It was a fragment of the truth, but it was enough to shatter the illusion of Russian invincibility. The data was quickly moved to physical drives and whisked away before the Oracle could recalculate and overwrite the logs. The fallout was immediate. Armed with the true ledger, Interpol bypassed traditional diplomatic channels and began a series of high-stakes urban raids. They didn't go to the Russian government, they went to the private server farms in the city centers. In a coordinated strike across 12 time zones, local police, under Interpol's direction, physically seized the hardware. They weren't fighting code anymore, they were fighting the physical reality of the machines. The Russian security firms were exposed not as protectors, but as the largest criminal hosting service in history. The methods they had marketed to the world were revealed as nothing more than a sophisticated invisibility cloak for the highest bidder. However, the victory was bittersweet. While Interpol had finally seen the crime, they realized the extent of the damage. The global financial system had been so thoroughly integrated with the Russian protocols that removing them meant a decade of economic stagnation. Many of the criminals they identified were too big to fail, individuals who held the keys to national infrastructures. Interpol had the evidence, but the world wasn't ready for the truth. The agents who had once been ignored were now being told by their own governments to moderate their findings. The Russian methods had disrupted global crime, but they had also woven themselves into the fabric of global stability. The story of the overlooked methods ends not with a grand trial, but with a quiet realignment. Interpol created a new digital sovereignty unit, dedicated to ensuring no single nation's security protocols could ever again become a global standard. The Russian architects disappeared, likely into the even deeper shadows of private military companies. The gray line was dismantled, but a new line was already being whispered about in the forums of Shenzhen and Tel Aviv. The lesson for Interpol was clear. In the digital age, oversight is a luxury you can't afford. If you don't understand the lock, you don't own the house. Today, as you walk through the smart streets of your city, the data is still flowing. Interpol is watching, but so is everyone else. The invisible fortress may have been breached, but the blueprints are out there, and the next version is already being written. The question isn't whether the police can see the crime, but whether we, the citizens, can see the police. As the line between security and surveillance continues to blur, the urban centers of the world remain the ultimate battlefield. Interpol agents no longer overlook the clunky methods of the East. They fear them, because they know that the next time the lights flicker, it might not be a glitch. It might be the beginning of the end of the visible world.